Today, that draft code is being released, and its key elements include a requirement on the digital platforms to enter into bargaining with Australian news media businesses when they indicate an intention to do so. It includes a provision that there is compulsory arbitration if that bargaining does not achieve an outcome after a designated period of time. There's a set of minimum requirements that will apply to the digital platforms. For example, a 28-day notice before changes to their algorithms that would, for example, substantially change the ranking of a news media business's content on those platforms, and also a general non-discrimination requirement as between news media businesses that are covered by the code and those that are not. Importantly, non-compliance with the code will attract significant penalties, which can include up to 10% of the Australian turnover of the digital platform. Now, in doing this, what we're wanting to do is to promote competition, to enhance consumer protection, and to support a sustainable Australian media landscape. There's no doubt that the digital platforms have rapidly become a very large part of Australia's economy, Australia's society. As the digital platforms inquiry pointed out, in a typical month, over 19 million Australians use Google, over 17 million use Facebook. The business model of the digital platforms is to aggregate content, not to produce their own content, and then to attract eyeballs to that content, which they can monetize through advertising, and they've done that very successfully. Now, what that content is doesn't greatly matter as far as their business model is concerned. It could be a news story about COVID-19, or it could be a cat video. If it gets the eyeballs and gets the advertising revenue, then that is what is important for their business model. But from a public policy point of view in Australia, and indeed globally, but certainly in Australia, there is a public interest in having a healthy media sector able to generate news on matters of interest to Australians. Now, that public policy objective is partly met through our government-funded broadcasters, ABC and SBS, but very importantly, it is also in large measure met by advertising-funded media businesses, be they large businesses like News Corp, Nine Entertainment Limited, Seven West Media on the one hand, or be they the many smaller businesses, including newspapers in country towns, often family-owned. It's in the public interest that we have a healthy and sustainable media sector, and that is why our government has engaged in sustained policy work on this issue, going back to the kick-off of the Digital Platforms Inquiry in 2017. And we've gone through a series of stages. In April this year, we took the decision that the ACCC would be asked to develop this mandatory code. Over recent months, the ACCC has consulted extensively with stakeholders, including the digital platforms, including news media businesses, and many other interested Australians. I want to acknowledge the work that the ACCC has done. I want to acknowledge the leadership that the Treasurer has shown, Josh Frydenberg, who's given great attention to this issue along with all the other things he's been managing, reflective of the importance the government attaches to these issues. What we now have is a draft code that will be in the public domain very shortly, and that then kicks off a period of consultation, a month of consultation, allowing people, stakeholders, to put their views to the ACCC before it then consolidates those views and makes its final recommendations to government. For the code to come into effect, it would need to be legislated, as the Treasurer has said this morning. Our aim is to introduce that legislation before the end of the year, so we want to move quickly. And of course, once the code is then in effect, that will kick off the process under which news media businesses firstly seek to be registered with the Australian Communications and Media Authority. That's a threshold requirement, and the ACMA will determine whether they are an eligible or qualifying news media businesses. Once they've done that, they can then notify the digital platforms of an intention to bargain. What also has to happen is that the Treasurer has to make a determination that the relevant digital platforms are covered by the code, and the government's indicated that the intention is that Google and Facebook will be covered by the code. So news media business registers with the ACMA, Treasurer declares or determines the digital platforms are covered by the code. News media businesses then initiate bargaining with the digital platform. They can do that either individually, or the code provides that they can do it collectively, and we think that's what is likely to happen in relation to the smaller newspapers, for example. And then if bargaining does not arrive at an outcome, then as regards remuneration issues, that's to say how much the news media businesses are paid for the use of their content on the digital platforms, that can then be the subject of arbitration, and that arbitration will be binding. It's important to say that ABC and SBS, the national broadcasters, will have the benefit of the provisions of the code in relation to minimum conditions on things like notice of changes to the algorithm, the non-discrimination provisions and so on. They will not, however, be able to use the remuneration provisions. The reason for that is that they are funded principally by government, and the policy emphasis of the work that's being done here is in relation to the advertising funded part of the media sector. The public policy interest is in having a vigorous commercial or advertising funded media sector, which in turn can fund and carry out important public interest journalism, as well as, of course, the important role that the government broadcasters carry out, but of course with government funding. So this is reflective of the priority the Morrison government attaches to strong competition. We want to see strong competition, and we certainly recognise that the services delivered by the digital platforms are widely used by Australians and valued by Australians. We want to see strong competition, we want to see a vigorous Australian media sector, and we want to see the best outcomes for consumers. That's what this code is all about, and with the draft code being released today, it's an important step towards getting to an outcome where we can have stronger support for the continuation of a viable commercial media sector in Australia as part of a vibrant and diverse modern media landscape.